These aren't free. Since they're Azure hosted, you do have to pay for them, but you'll see that they're so inexpensive, and the value of these is well worth what little you do pay. So once you have your plan set up, then you can start building these environments, okay? So this VS Online environment is effectively, it's a code space. And as you look at the icons there, you can see you get a lot of stuff that's kind of included with the code space itself. And each of these is completely independent of another one. And if you automate how they're built and how they get configured, then you can spin these things up, use them, and then delete them. And therefore, you don't have to pay for them. They do a good job of trying to keep your costs down. But if you don't want to pay what little it costs just to store it when it's not running, you can just delete the whole thing. And I'll show you why that's not a bad idea to do. Once we have our environment, now it's like, okay, so we got this cloud environment sitting up there. How are we going to get to it? So there's several different ways. The main one right now is Visual Studio Code. That's the most mature model that they have set up. And so I'm going to be doing everything in Visual Studio Code today. This is public preview, so there are still things changing. I found things change as late as yesterday. I was working on some of this. So Visual Studio itself is in private preview. I have not messed with that at all. You have to sign up for the private preview, but you'll be able to connect to these code spaces using Visual Studio as this starts to mature a little bit. And lastly, this is one that a lot of developers are excited about, is you can actually access the code in the browser. So whatever your modern browser of choice, they left Firefox off here for some reason. But anyway, any modern browser, you can connect to these code spaces, and you'll see what that looks like and what you can do there. You can't do everything that you can do in, say, Visual Studio Code, but it's pretty compatible. With that said, let's go see some demos. So we're going to start from the very beginning with nothing else, installed, and we're going to build all this. So we're going to offer Simon Hudson as a sacrifice to the demo gods, and hopefully that'll work out and we can do this. All right. Oh, my session expired. That's nice. All right. So we're going to start off in Azure, so I can just see where I'm going to build this, and that we're starting with effectively nothing. So I have a subscription. It's an MSD subscription, and there's nothing in there. So I've deleted all the resource groups. I've deleted all the resources. The cost down here is just old stuff because I got 1 day left in my month, and so these are just stuff that was in this subscription before I started deleting everything. So don't worry about that. We'll talk about cost here in a little bit. So there's nothing there. So we're going to start from scratch. So if we go over to Visual Studio Online, or the Codespaces home, there basically it's just onlinevisualstudio.com, and then it'll throw you into login or throw you into environments depending on whether you're logged in or not. So, but that's the URL, onlinevisualstudio.com. If you search for Codespaces, it will get you there. But I expect that the URL is going to probably change as this starts to move along. So once I log into my Azure with my account, I had to do it twice. Interesting. Once I log in with the account that's associated with that subscription, then I get to the Codespaces home. So real quick, just, there's not a whole lot here, especially at the very beginning. A couple of settings. If you want to work with insider stuff, you can flip this on. I haven't really played with that. Once you create a plan, if you decide you want to get rid of it, you can come down here and it'll show up in this drop down and you can just hit delete. And then the environment variables I haven't played with either, but it looks like it's, looks like you can define some things here that can be pulled into your code space and used either during configuration or elsewise. But I haven't even seen any demos on exactly what to do with that. So let's start off. Let's create a plan. So it's going to go out. It's going to grab subscriptions. So you pick the subscription you want to create this in. Right now, there's only 4 locations that you can build these in. So I'm using the East US, but you guys obviously would probably be using mostly Western Europe. The prices do vary a little bit. Obviously, the closer you are, the better the performance, but you can definitely change that as you need to. Then you get some advanced options. It will give you a default plan name and resource group, but we're going to just change this up because I like more descriptive names. So we'll start with the plan there, and then the resource group. I like to just put all my code spaces in one particular in one resource group. So I'm just going to designate that. For the instance type, remember I talked about there's 3 different size compute plans that you can buy. This is just setting up the default. So when you create a code space, this will show what shows up. But you can change this. Not only can you change it when you create a code space, you can create this. You can change this after you've created it. So you can shut it down, change this setting. So if you determine that 4 cores just isn't enough and you need the full power of 16, or I'm sorry, of 8 cores, then you can change that on the fly. So I'm going to create this real quick, and all this stuff you notice happens pretty quickly in your. You're saying, why now? Okay, this is just okay. Demo guys, we're going to have to sacrifice both assignments, I think, because that's not what it should have done. Oh, I take it back. I'm jumping ahead. We just created the plan. Okay, so there's our plan. So now we can create the code space. My bad. So we're going to create a code space. We're just going to start with leads 1 because we're going to build a couple of these. I'm going to skip the Git repo for a minute. We'll come back to that. So here's that default instance, which we can change if we want. There's a default time that you can set for how long it will. If you go idle, it will shut things down. So you get a couple options there. That's how they try and help you keep the cost down so you don't leave these things running for days. If you've ever had a virtual machine that you forgot to shut down and your $150 credit is gone in about a day and a half, that's not a good thing. Dot files, I haven't messed with these, but the idea behind these is that you can set up some configuration pieces in these repositories, and then they'll be pulled into the code space. But I haven't had a chance to really play with those to see how they do that. We're going to do the configuration in the project itself, and we'll talk about how that works. All right, so now it's creating my code space, but I'm just going to jump back here real quick so we can see this particular screen again while it's creating, is you get some options once you get here. So you can basically, even when this thing is shut down, you can basically say, open it up or connect to it, and that'll fire it up. This is that change setting, so that's where you can make the machine bigger if you want, have a couple different options there. If you want to just stop computing right now, you can do that, or you can delete the whole thing. So it's pretty easy to do right there. So what we're going to do first is we're going to do connect. So this is going to pop over, and when this connects to our code space has been created. We didn't tell it to start with anything. This is just a plain generic code space. So as it connects in here, so what we'll start to see is something that looks a whole lot like Visual Studio Code, right? So if you're familiar with working with that, so our little bar over here on the side with our actions are there. The top menu is gone, but it's actually right here in this little hamburger, and it's the exact same. If you're familiar with how Visual Studio Code is built, it's built to do this. The Electron model that they use is built to do this. And this works just like Visual Studio Code. So you get a lot of the same options. So there's some markdown. I can look at a preview. If I do, control comma, it takes me to settings, and I can set all my settings up. So it works very much like Visual Studio Code. If I create a file, so we'll just create a JavaScript file. It recognizes that it's a JavaScript file. Okay, it tells us down here, yep, you're working in JavaScript. If I hit Control Space, it will load up IntelliSense. So it has all the same stuff that you find in Visual Studio Code right here in the browser. So if you're at your mother-in-law's house or your grandma's house and you get a frantic call from someone who needs some help on something, if you can have access to code spaces, you can get to it in a browser without anything else installed on the machine. All right, let's see where we are here. Did we read the new file? Okay, so let's look and see what exactly we're getting in here, because you see it only gives us a couple of files. So what exactly does this code space give us? So I'm going to open up the terminal and let's take a look. So what's available right now is Linux. So this is actually a Linux virtual machine. They are working on, I think as part of the Visual Studio preview, you can actually have a Windows machine as the host for your code space, if I understand that right. If you go into, if you're familiar with Linux, I am not a Linux guy. I'm learning as we go along. If you just go up a few levels from your code space and check to see what's there, you'll see this starts to look exactly like a Linux machine. Yeah, it is a Linux machine, so it would look like it. But the the big thing is that everything that's in here, if you delete this code space, it's all going away. So, there's really no reason to go play with any of these other settings, while you're in the code space, if you're just going to end up deleting it all anyway. If you can set up some automation, that's a little bit different story. Okay, so we're in here. Let's see what else we get. So as SharePoint developers or SharePoint framework developers, the first thing we're always going to want to look for is see if there's any Node in there. So it does have Node, but if you look there, it's version 12. And if you're familiar with SharePoint framework, we can't use version 12 yet. I think it's coming, but they haven't quite got that figured out yet. We have to use version 10. It's the latest version we can use. So that's not going to help us as far as SharePoint framework. So let's see what else might be available to help us. I don't know if you're familiar with Node Version Manager. It's a product that comes in both a Linux flavor and a Windows flavor. They're very, very similar. They have a couple of little differences. But this will allow us to swap out that Node version for something different. So let me try that real quick. So, nope, I forget. That. So let's go ahead and install version 10. So we're going to use nvm install 10 and let it go install that. So it looks like it found it, looks like it downloaded it, but it looks like it had an issue down here with something, okay? I don't know what this is. This is just a common thing right now. So it gives you a couple options that you can run to get rid of that and then go back and run the install, and now it'll work. So this is what you're looking for. You're looking for that it's installed and you're able to use it. So if I go back now and do a Node version, it'll, oops, let's try and spell it right. It'll tell me I'm in 1022, okay? That's something as a SharePoint developer I can work with. So let's see what else is there. So once you go into get the right version of Node, then you're gonna need all the tool set that goes with SharePoint framework. So let's see, what am I looking for? List. Global, and then let's do this. So now we can look and see, okay, so what else is installed in here? And what you'll see is nothing. All right, it's a raw instance of npm. So that means we have to go install Yeoman, we have to install the Yeoman SharePoint, and installer, gulp, any other things that you like to install in your environment, we have to go do that manually. So I know I'm probably selling you. This looks like it's a lot of fun, right? We have to do this every time. Trust me, we'll get to something different. So what I'm going to do is I could go and do all that for you, but I'm going to do something just a little bit different. And instead of going and installing all that stuff so I can generate a project, I'm just going to go grab a project that's already made, so I don't have to worry about doing that. So first thing I'll do is just clear everything out. And I'm going to grab a command over here. So I've got up in GitHub, I've got a repo that is nothing more than I just ran the Yeoman generator, did the out-of-the-box Hello World web part, and then just stored it in GitHub. So if you look over here, you'll see it's just the standard, web part. I did use React because I do like playing with the React stuff. So it's just a React web part, but nothing else has been added to it. So that's all it really is. So the only thing that hasn't been done on this is we haven't installed all the dependencies. So we'll run our npm I, so that'll start running that. That takes a little bit of time. So what we're gonna do while that's running is I'm gonna hop back over here, and I told you that we were going to talk about pricing. Here's our pricing. So let me, oh, I know, I forgot to do something, but okay, that's fine. We'll do this first. All right, so real quick about the pricing. So there's a nice little pricing link that was in that plans page. And if you go and look here, you can set up your region, you set up your currency, and then it'll tell you how much this stuff will cost. What I find is more relevant is down here, it's got some scenarios. Okay, so 730 hours in a 30-day month. If you spend 100 hours in Codespaces, working, it's going to run you, so that's basically 2.5 work weeks. It's going to run you 22 pounds. Okay, so that's really not much. If you're not actually in there with it running, it's just sitting there storing your stuff, you're looking at about 6 pounds a month. I think these numbers are a little bit light. That's not unlike Microsoft. They're selling stuff, but it's still not bad. I've been playing with this stuff quite a bit, and it's rare that I spend over $40 a month in Codespaces, even if I'm using it a lot. All right, so let's get back to, back into our project. What I forgot to do is I was going to switch over out of the browser and go into Visual Studio Code. So let's see if it will finish doing what it's doing. I think it died on me. So let's talk about, okay, so we're looking at the browser. So it's really easy if you go into Codespaces to say, I would like to just open this project in Visual Studio Code. So if I select that, it'll say, okay, which Codespace would you like to open? So now I'm switching over out of the browser, and I'm actually in my local instance of Visual Studio Code. So it's same sort of stuff, but what's cool about this is that I have, because it's the local, and it always opens up 2 windows, and I don't know why that is. Because I'm in my local instance of Visual Studio Code, I get all my, whatever extensions I put in here, all the settings that I've done, so all the stuff that I've done to customize Visual Studio Code for my work, now I have access to all of that. The browser, you don't, it's just very generic. You can actually add all that stuff if you want, but I find this to be much more appeasing. All right, so I want to do a couple quick things here. Since I'm in here, I'm going to turn this on so you can see the keystrokes we're using. And I don't know if that npm I finished, so I'm just going to run it again real quick as it's doing that. So if you're familiar with SharePoint Framework, the goal here is we're trying to get to gulp serve. So at gulp serve, that's where your code actually gets put into a website, the workbench, that you can start working with the code. So that's really what I'm trying to get to, is to get there. So the npm actually did finish. So let's try and see if we can do a gulp serve. It doesn't like that. Oh, I remember I talked about it doesn't like it if you have to install gulp for some reason again. I haven't had a chance to ask the guys why this is the case, because there's a dependency for gulp inside the project. So it does install it. It just doesn't recognize it for some reason. Okay, that's starting to look good. So that looks like gulp serve. All right, so we're finally there, but we've gone down a pretty long path to get here. So we got a couple more little things too that we're still not quite there, because as we go to open this, normally when you do a gulp serve, it opens it for you. But remember that this is code running in the cloud being exposed on your local desktop. So it doesn't know how to open up the browser from the cloud. So you have to open this up manually. So it's just a little extra step, and you get used to it pretty quick. So now it says it can't find the URL. And if you look, it starts to make sense why that is, because this is localhost. So I can get that. So we're trying to connect the localhost. So normally if we're running this on our local machine, this is running in a local Node.js website that it spins up for you to host this workbench. But we're not doing that. This is actually up in the cloud. So the way Codespaces gets around that is through port forwarding. So if we come over here to the Codespace piece, we have this option here to do port forwarding. So I'm going to forward a couple of ports. 5432 is one, and then 4321. Those are the two, and you can see them both right there. That need to be forwarded just to get to this part. There's a couple others that we'll forward when we start doing the automation piece. All right, so now if I go back over into my browser and refresh, okay, now we're starting to see things. Okay, now we're starting to see the workbench pop up. Occasionally I'm not getting it now, but you can see it's got a security error. So every time you create a new dev environment, you have to do that gulp trust certificate in order to get this to go away. Normally it stops, and basically you have to kind of acknowledge that, you know, I know it's unsecure, but please continue. It didn't do that this time for me. But we'll cover how we can do that with some automation here in a minute. All right, so here we are. We finally get to our web part, man. That's an impressive web part, if I do say so myself. And now we can actually start working with code. You get the standard behavior where if I go into the actual code and make a change to the components, and I go in here. So instead of hello, come on, never. Oh, I get the, there we go. Let's turn that down. Oh, you know, just change this to, and save it. You'll see the standard behavior where it actually starts, it refreshes the build in the cloud, gets back to the reload, and then it actually is it's actually reloading. No, it didn't reload. Okay, should reload. But it'll actually, it normally will go through and actually reload it for yourself. I may not have just waited long enough. But again, we start to get that live connection back and forth. Oh, actually, I know why it did do that. The live connection back and forth between our code and the deploy. So now we can actually start doing stuff. But that's an awful lot of work. I hope everyone agrees. That's way too much work. So let's talk about how we can make this work better for us. So I'm going to just drag this in here and put it in here to start with. So I'm going to grab this folder on my local device and just throw it into the project. And I'm going to come back in a minute and we'll talk about exactly what's in this folder, what the files are. Oh, you know what? That's not where I wanted to do that. Just like all over the place. Let's try it again. Like it never takes that long. All right, let's do it this way. So I want to copy the folder there. It's going to add a folder up here called dev containers. And like I said, I'm going to come back here in a minute and we'll talk about that. But what I want to do right now is I just want to commit those changes real quick. And sync them back up because I want them up in GitHub because I'm about to go use them once they're up there. So remember when we were creating the code space, there was that option for the repository that I said we were going to skip over and come back. Now we're going to go back and use that. So, but instead of going back into the browser, because like I said before, everything you can do in, there we go. Everything you can do in the browser on that website, you can do straight from Visual Studio Code if you install the Codespaces extension. So get everything cleaned out. Nothing's in here. Okay, so now I'm going to go back and I'm going to create a new Codespace again. So let's create a new one. I'm going to stick to the default setting. So here's where I pick out that repository. So here's my repository. And it's the exact same project that I just committed and uploaded. So I'm going to call this leads 2. And it's going to go through the same thing. So now we get to watch it do this from inside of Visual Studio. We watched it do it a little bit in the browser, but we can watch how it builds this code space. And it gives us some nice visual indication about what's happening. At some point here shortly, a little blue button will show up that says connect. So it's still building, but now it will actually, you know, it's gotten to the point now where it will allow me to connect to the actual code space. So now I can start seeing the code while it finishes all of the background configuration that's going on. As soon as we can see that code, we can start talking about that dev connections piece. I'm going to go ahead and turn the progress logs on. It turns that screen off for some reason, but I'm just going to turn it back on. And then we're going to look at the dev container. Okay, so the dev container, really there's only 2 files that matter in here. The other 2 files are actually I use for something differently. So the first one is this dev containers .json file. I'm going to pull this one over here so we can. There we go. So you see them side by side. So we can watch it still over here building our code space. So it takes a little bit of time for it to run through that because you'll see why in a minute. So this is the configuration for the actual code space. So I give it a name. You can set up, if you have specific settings for your environment inside Visual Studio Code that you need to be set, you can put those in here. Again, that's more for the browser version than it is for the local version, but it still works the same way. Here's those forwarded ports. All right, so we forwarded those first 2 just to get the thing to run, but here's some additional ones. This has to do with the live reload. That's why it didn't do the live reload. And then there's a couple of debug ports that we're going to forward for later. The only extension I typically put in here is this one. This is the extension that allows it to recognize what the file is, if it's a JavaScript file or a PowerShell file whatever. So I just leave that one in there. All the other ones, since I do most of my stuff in my local instance of VS Code, all the extensions I use are already installed in here, so I don't need to have it install it for me. And then the last thing it does is it goes ahead and it runs this bash script, and then we're going to go look at that. So you can see over here it's actually finished. So so keep in mind the time frame that it finished while we go talk about this other file, because we're going to come back in a minute and see something hopefully cool. All right, so the other one is this script. So this is a script that I wrote. So there's some things in here. So at my company, we can't actually push anything back to the master branch. So I just normally I uncomment this, and so it forces me to check out a dev branch, either one that I currently have or it creates a new one, so that I never accidentally make changes to the master. And then it's going to go through this little set of steps here. So it's going to this installs NVM, and then remember this is that little piece of code we had to put in there in order to get NVM to work. So I went ahead and stuck that in there. Here's the install. So these are all the commands that we typed in earlier. It's going to run them all for me, all the way down to npm install. And then it's going to run that. I'm going to skip this section. I'll come back to it in a second. Then it's going to go actually and do that Gulp Trust Dev Cert that we skipped earlier, because it just takes a little bit of time. It creates the certificate in a specific folder above our code space. So I just copy it from that location into the root of my project, and you can see it's right down here. Okay, so now there's some instructions here. I have to download that and then install it on my local machine, because remember, this is still all up in the cloud. So I have to download it from the cloud, install it on my local machine. There's some comments down here. There's some commands I can do down here. I can do it manually. Several different ways of getting that certificate installed. It just takes a minute. And then the last thing I do is I go out and check to see if the get-ignore file has a line, so it will ignore that certificate. Shouldn't store your certificates with your project. That's not a good security issue or plan. So I basically check to see if it's there. If it's not, then I just add a little section that says, hey, ignore any certificates. Do not upload this into my repository. So that's everything that gets run that was running over here while we were talking. So if we go away now, so now let's go and let's see. Turn the keystrokes back on. I have to do it every time. Okay, so now if you go back into the terminal, remember I said our goal was to get to, let's get in the terminal. Ignore that. Was to get to Gulp Serve. So effectively, if you think about it, I created a new code space. I let all the code, all the script and everything run. And as soon as it said it was ready, I can immediately run a Gulp Serve and start working with my code. So from start to finish, that took about 2 minutes to spin that thing up. So you start to see the value in, if the code is stored in a repo somewhere, and it doesn't have to be GitHub, you can store it in Azure DevOps, whatever, it doesn't make any difference. Any repo you can get to in the cloud, you can download that repo and then start working on your code almost immediately. All right, so what's next? So now we can work on the code. Where am I here? Dev container, did all that, did the Gulp Serve. Okay, so the last piece I want to talk about is the debug story. Now, what I'll tell you is that as of yesterday, I had to basically come clean and say the debug doesn't quite work. I'm still trying to figure out the debug. So I can run debug, but it doesn't hit my breakpoints, and it doesn't do all the stuff I want it to do. So if you're familiar with the dev tools that are in the browsers, you can still use those. I personally don't care for them as much, just because if I find an issue in the code in the browser, I still have to come back to my code and my project, make the change, save it, and then refresh everything. So if I'm hitting a breakpoint right in my code, then I don't have to worry about having to come back and find the right line and all that sort of stuff. We can look at how the browser works if you guys want to here in a minute. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to set the debugger up. So by default, you don't get any debug or any debugger stuff in a Visual Studio. You might get like some generic stuff depending on some extensions you might have. So what I have is I have a file that's called launch.json that has all my debug stuff in it debugger stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that into the right spot, and we can look at that real quick. So if you're familiar with this, and I have a blog post on my blog that talks about this, so you can set up multiple configurations for debugging. The one we're going to use today is this local edge workbench. So basically, it's going to open up the localhost URL that we looked at before in Edge. It's got some settings here, and then effectively it opens up a special version of the browser with the remote debugging turned on, and then hopefully that will connect everything together so that we can set breakpoints and do all the debugging stuff that we want. All right, so if we come back here, we pick our Edge configuration. You can see it started up our debugger and opened up a new browser. Remember, we haven't done the certificate stuff yet, so we're going to get this until we do. So whether it's worth it or not, depending on what you're doing. And I've seen this a couple times too, and I don't know why this is. So sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. So if I just go to the other address, sometimes it will refresh correctly. I don't know why it doesn't. It's the exact same address, so I don't know why it doesn't work the first time through. But again, remember I said, I keep saying, this is in preview, so we're still cleaning a lot of this stuff up. All right, so we're back to our workbench. We can turn on our web part and look at it. And let's put these things side by side real quick. And I'm going to go find, where's my little the file that I was messing with before. Not a lot of places in the default project to set a breakpoint because there's not a lot of code in here. So, but I'm just going to set a breakpoint. Let's set it right here on this file here, and then let's change this to. We'll just add this real quick. Save it, and look in the terminal. If you look down here, it's refreshing the terminal. So it's reset the website. It's serving everything back up again, and then it's going to show it over here in the browser. But it hit the web part. It hit the breakpoint. Okay, so this works just like a typical breakpoint. So I don't have anything defined, but if I look in here, so you can see all the local variables. If you want to set a watch, you can see the call stack. So all the typical developer things that we do when we're debugging are all available right in this window. So if I tell it just to continue on, then it goes ahead and we can see the updated piece there. So that's the down and dirty, pretty fast on how this all works. So let me finish up with a couple of slides, and then we can start digging into questions. So I'm sure I probably missed a couple things. So here's kind of what I consider the main advantages for Codespaces. One, these are on demand. So again, at no point in my demo did we ever look at anything that was on my local machine. All of this was stored in the cloud. It was all stored in GitHub repos. And I was able to spin stuff up, use it. I can then delete it if I want to. And then, next time I need to go in there, now the key is, remember, everything gets deleted. So I need to make sure I commit my changes, get them synchronized back up into the repo before I delete everything. But next time I can just start right over again and build it from scratch. And you saw within a couple minutes, I can be back to coding in this stuff. It's pretty much environment agnostic. There's different environments you can build, but again, it doesn't matter what my local environment is as far as how I build these things. And the disposable piece. So I've talked to several guys that are trying to use this more and more, and they're basically saying they just delete them. As soon as they finish their code, they commit the code, they sync, and then they basically delete the code space right there, because again, it's so easy to come back. There was a limit recently. You could only have 3 code spaces in a plan, but you could have as many plans as you wanted. When I was working on getting this ready, I was able to do 5 or 6 code spaces. So I think they've upped that limit as we get closer to general availability. Performance, I can show a demo where I basically have a local instance of that exact same repo, and it's already been cloned and everything. It's all sitting there ready to do the npm install. I use pnpm. If you're familiar with that module, because it actually, if you've already downloaded, not modules in the past, it doesn't re-download them. It just reuses them, and it does linking, and it's a really cool little thing, and it works much better than NPM. NPM works great for Codespaces because of the whole disposable piece. So it's not worth installing all these extra tools if I'm just going to delete the entire Codespace anyway. So, but I put them side by side, and we kick them off. So I kick off the PNPM install, and then I go over to the other Visual Studio instance and start from scratch and say, let me create a brand new Codespace. And I go through the entire created Codespace and then wait for it to finish. And I can get the Gulp serve faster in the Codespaces than I can on my local machine, even though I've already done work on the local machine to speed things up. And then costs. Like I said, there are some costs, but I think they're pretty reasonable. You know, and the advantages is I think are worth the cost. There we go. That's Codespaces, and about as fast as I can do it. So, what kind of questions do you guys have?
So, what are the limitations, Don? What do you think? Where do you think it's got rough edges or feature gaps?
Well, honestly, up until yesterday, I would have said the limitations were the fact that I couldn't quite debug the way I wanted to. So, you know, I had to do the kind of the split debugging. So I'd have to run the debugger in Visual Studio, but then I have to go look at the breakpoints and my variables and all that stuff over in the dev tools in the browser. But whether they changed something or I just found something, I found one piece this morning that it worked one time for me yesterday, and I was like, well, it gave me hope. And then this morning I was playing with it, and I found another piece, another setting I could put inside that launch.json file. And ever since I did that, it's just been working. So that limitation's gone away. Again, there's cost. I mean, some places are very, you know, picky about the cost. But like I said, if you have an MSDN subscription, you know, you get your $150 a month. You can go sign up for a brand new Azure subscription with a brand new account, and I think you get $400. So at $40 a month, that's 10 months worth of Codespaces, you know, of having, you know, basically using a lot of Codespaces for 10 months before you run out of that free $400. So, but depending on your organization, you know, like I said, GMF is very locked down. I have not been able to get Codespaces to work there yet, but I've put it on hold because I work out of a VDI, and they're about to give me a brand new VDI that supposedly is more built for devs, and so I'm waiting to configure that VDI rather than messing with the one I currently have. So I have hope that I can get this to work, because I do find it, especially the VDIs, depending on how powerful they are. So back to performance. So depending on your machine, how powerful your machine is, you know, the Linux machine running in the cloud is really, really fast, because it is stripped down. There's nothing extra on this. It's just Linux. Well, it's actually a strength, in my opinion. So I'm trying to think other limitations that I could come up with. Obviously, there's a learning curve. There's not a lot of knowledge out there on this. I mean, the Microsoft stuff will talk about Codespaces, but the details on how to do this are pretty limited. Paul Schaeflin and I have worked together a little bit. He's done a couple of blog posts, and he's also done a demo on the PNP, one of the PNP calls on this. He's about the only other one I found that's doing this. And I talked to like Andrew Connell about it, and he said he's interested in it, but you know, we're talking about the debug piece. When I couldn't get it to work, he said I just use the browser anyway. So like I said, a lot of developers don't use the debug tools in Visual Studio Code anyway. But there's not a lot out there. So I'm working on a blog post, and now that this debug piece is working, I'm really going to be pushing to try and get that done. So I'll try and share those files. So the JSON file and the script, I'll try and share those out to make it, you know, as easy for people to get into this as you can, because those I've been using those. That script has been pretty stable for about a month, and have had to make very little changes to it in order to get it to work.
That's cool. Have you ever done any sort of, you know, .NET Core development? Codespaces, or
I've done .NET Core development, but not in Codespaces. The only thing I've done in Codespaces is the SharePoint framework piece. Yeah. My understanding is if you look at the so there was at Ignite last year, so it's a year old, and I know there was some stuff at Build, but I have not watched any of the sessions at Build. But Nick Molnar is the guy who wrote this, and basically, we talked earlier about Microsoft buying things. They basically bought him, so they hired him to basically get this all set up. And but he did a session at Ignite last year on this, and he was using, I'm trying to remember what it was. It was a .NET. I don't know if it's .NET Core or not, but it was either an ASP.NET or an ASP.NET Core app that he was using this on. If you read the documentation from Microsoft, it's not SharePoint framework. It's very much other technologies that they talk about. So I haven't personally done it, but it says it can all be done. So you just got to figure out, hey, so what are the settings I need? What do I need to install on that Linux machine to get .NET Core set up so that I can just connect to it and start working? But it's pretty simple. I mean, the new CLIs that they're coming out with that easily install all that stuff really help. And it's a Linux machine that has full connectivity to the cloud. So again, anything you need, you can download it. PowerShell or bash commands, whatever you need to do, you can grab that stuff.
Cool. And have you connected it to? Have you tried connecting it to Azure DevOps type Git repo? Is that?
Yeah.
Well, that works okay. I guess you've got the authentication things.
Yeah, you have to fight through the authentication. If you're using Visual Studio Code, then it's the same authentication you're using in Visual Studio Code. It works just fine. But when you go to put that repo URL in there, they've got it set up for GitHub. If you're going to use something out of GitHub, you just have to put the account in the repo name. If you want to use Azure DevOps, you have to put the full URL in there. And it worked. That's what we do. We have access to GitHub, but we're not supposed to really use it. That's what I just use to move files back and forth between inside and outside the company. But for the actual code I work on for General Motors is all stored in Azure DevOps, and it works just fine with no problem. Like I said, I can do parts of it at work. I haven't gotten all of it to work yet, and it's a lot to do with firewalls and stuff like that.
Yeah. Cool. Dylan.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for your talk, Don. One of the things I was thinking about, in some ways, this sounds like quite a pandemic-proof solution, because I know in a lot of developers, typically people have remoted in from home to their work machine, and you're obviously limited by remote desktop and how good the VPN connection is, and it's a less than satisfactory solution. This actually sounds like it's a pretty good solution if you're going to be working from the office some days and also from home some days, and being able to switch between the two quite rapidly, which is obviously the world we live in today, isn't it? Where even if you go back to the office, you may end up working from home again because suddenly the COVID-19 will flare up where you happen to be and the office is closed again. Would you agree with that it seems to actually be quite a good solution to get around the problems of flipping between working from home and working from work when you don't take a laptop between the two locations?
Absolutely. And that's why I say one of the advantages that environmental agnostic is that, again, everything is really contained in the cloud. And so other than your local instance of Visual Studio Code, which again is my preferred way of working on this, but even if I didn't, I can do a lot of this stuff in the browser version. I haven't played with the debugging piece since I just got that working today to see if that still works in the browser. I think there's a couple of issues with that. But no, I absolutely agree that this, by pushing all of the compute and all of that stuff into the cloud, now any place you can get to it, you can pull it down, work on it, push it back out, and then shut down. And I'm actually working on this same presentation for the North American Collaboration Summit in Branson in a couple of months, if it goes. And I'm thinking about having, my wife is going to go with me, but I'm thinking about having her do something similar to that session I was talking to that Nick did at Ignite. He basically did live share as part of this, because it's Visual Studio Code. So it's not, so live share is not part of Codespaces. It's just part of Visual Studio Code, but you could do the exact same thing where you did a live share with someone who doesn't even have Visual Studio Code on their machine, and they can look at your code and they can run your code from the browser without ever doing, so absolutely, this really, to me, opens up the places that you can work and you can do code, and you're not tied to, it's my dev machine because I got to have it because it has all my tools on it, and so yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that, because to me that seemed to be the major advantage, is that it doesn't matter where you are, and it is just annoying having to remote to your work machine from home because you're doing everything remotely, laggy VPN, all that sort of stuff. So this seems to be a much better solution.
Yep, and like I said, so like the work I do at GM Financial, I connect. I have my laptop here because the VDIs aren't always real reliable, but I connect via VDI. But I've had different levels of VDIs, and the first one I had was stable, but it was really slow. And if I could have gotten this working, then it wouldn't make any difference. I mean, really, it's the only thing that is updating in Visual Studio is kind of the screen. It's the bits that are the changes to update your screen. But it doesn't take a really strong connection because all the compute power is being done in the cloud. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I do think that's a really strong advantage.
Presumably no files are downloaded to the local machine of the source code when you're working on stuff. That all stays in the cloud.
As far as I know, that's correct. Because when you say you want to connect to that remote workspace, then it literally reaches out. There may be some temp files that get stored, I guess, somewhere. I'm not sure, but I haven't really dug into that. But it's really looking at the code the same way it would be from the browser if you were doing it in the browser. The first part of the demo I did.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking of some customers are very twitchy about their code that they own or that they have some responsibility towards being on somebody's quote unquote home machine. So I can see that as being a good way to get around those misgivings.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to write that down because at some point I'm going to have a conversation with Nick, and he's the guru on this, and so I'd love that. That's a great question for him to answer. Is if any artifacts are left on the local machine at all?
Yeah, because people are quite sensitive about source code sometimes, and anything on a local machine might bother some people.
Right. Nope, I agree. Good question.
Yeah, because obviously it's a big consideration now that you can, in theory, secure a work environment quite well, but you can't necessarily secure somebody's home environment when you're working from home in quite the same way.
Absolutely. Yep.
That's great about the live. Been able to use live stream. Yeah.
Live share.
Live share. Yeah. I think that'd be really interesting. Simon and I are working on a community effort, and it's all in GitHub, and just to be able to and it's all in Markdown, and so being able to just both of us spin up this GitHub repo and be able to work and share and live share and see what each other's doing. I think it'd be really cool. So we need to set this up, Simon. We'll have a go.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to actually mess with the live share too much. Again, it's something else that doesn't currently work at my regular job. Because they've made a change recently, so I want to try it again. But the way it was working before is you had to have access to a cloud-based service to set up the connection between you and your work partner. But once the connection was established, it was point to point. But our proxy blocked the initial connection. So, but I've heard that they're trying a different way of doing it, and so I haven't had a chance to play with that. But if you've seen the demos for that, it really looks like a cool tool in the fact that it's similar to this, in the fact that if I live share with someone, not only can they see my code, they can edit my code in the session, they can actually run their code with none of the artifacts on their machine. They're just effectively running it on my machine. So you don't have to have matching environments or anything like that. So you can see the other advantage of these code spaces is that you set these environments up, those configuration files, and you can set them up to be very distinct between projects. So I could have a set of dev container files that if I was working on an old web part that we haven't updated, so it's back in version 1.7, so it's using Node 7 or 8 point something, and if you've ever tried to run it in the wrong version of Node, it's like it just craps all over the place. So being able to set up, say, okay, I know that this particular solution, I need to have Node version 8. I'll just build the def container piece there, and then again, I'm right back to gulp serve with all the right stuff. So these are, like I said, as you build these out. So I'm trying to kind of store all these def container files into like my own repo, because I thought maybe I could use that dot files part to do that, and I haven't got that to work yet. But so we talked about, I don't remember who asked about the .NET Core or whatever. Yeah, but you set up a different set of files for .NET Core, and again, you say that's the configuration file, this is the project, and you should be able to just once you get that configured right, you're cooking as soon as everything finishes installing.
Yeah, definitely. That's really good. Just a little thing, when you got VS Code and it was displaying what you were pressing, your keyboard strokes. What did you do to? What was that?
That's actually built into VS Code. I didn't know this till yesterday. I've seen there's a YouTube series. A guy comes out, I don't remember his name off the top of my head, comes out with a new video every single day, tips on VS Code, and that's always on his screen that he does that. And so I was like, okay, there's probably an extension somewhere. I got to go find it. But as I started searching, if you go into your commands and you type in, what is it called? Screencast. It's actually built right in there, developer screencast mode. So I don't think that's coming from an extension as far as I understand it. So you just turn it on and off. And then when it's on, and you can go into, if you go into the settings and search for screencast, there's a couple things you can set. So screencast mode. So you can set the font size. You can tell it only show keyboard shortcuts. In other words, if I'm typing, I'm typing code in there, I don't want to see every character that I type. But if I'm using a control key or a command key on a Mac or whatever, then it shows that. And then you can basically adjust where it shows up in the screen. I actually put it at 50 earlier today, and then I didn't like it because it was covering up what I was working on. So putting it down there towards the bottom, 20 is the default. So there's 3 settings you can set there, but this is apparently built right into VS Code. But it's definitely cool for doing presentations like that, because you're not constantly having to say, okay, now I'm going to press Control, comma, and I'm going to, so yeah, it works out real nice.
Yeah, that's right, isn't it? It also as well, just when someone, when somebody presses some weird keystroke, you're like, oh, whoa, what was that?
Yeah.
I've been reading the latest edition of Pragmatic Programmer. One of the other organizers, Gary, was talking about it last week, and I thought, oh yeah, I should read it. But it's talking about, get rid of your mouse for a day and just use the keyboard and just work out how you can, get around your IDE without taking your mouse, taking your hand off the keyboard, and just work through those shortcuts. It'll be painful for a few hours, but you'll get better.
It absolutely is. And being kind of an old school programmer, I love using the keystrokes. I gotten very spoiled with the IDEs and the fact that, you can mess around and find everything. So what I typically do is I'll do that until I get to the point where it's like, okay, this is something that I really, okay, so I want to open this terminal up. It's like, and how do I open that? I forgot which one of these do I have to go up here? New term. Okay, there you go. So eventually, I'll learn the keystroke, and then once I know the keystroke, it's like I rarely have to go ever find it again. So yeah, I absolutely agree. If I can stay on the keyboard, I like it, but it's a work in progress.
Yeah, that's right. There's enough other things to remember, isn't there?
Exactly. So yeah, some of these really weird keystrokes are just, it's like, wait, and some of them, even in Visual, it's like it's Control Shift K F, but you have to let go of the Control and Shift before you hit the F, because that doesn't work. It's like there's really strange things that you have to keep track of. But yeah. Visual Studio Code, I love the fact that you can set your own keystrokes. Like Control S saves the current file. I think I set up Control Shift S, or maybe it was Control SS, to save all files. You know,
Yeah.
there wasn't actually a keystroke for doing that. So, you know, so that's a nice feature of Visual Studio Code. I love Visual Studio Code, to be honest. I've used Visual Studio for years, but since Visual Studio Code came out and it became so easy to use for web type development, I can't remember the last time I opened up Visual Studio. I mean, I open it up at work. I open it up because I get an email saying, "Hey, the version of Visual Studio you have needs to be updated." It's like, oh, okay. So I open it up, do the update, and then shut it back down. You know,
Yeah.
but I haven't used it in quite a while. Probably since the last time I was writing some console apps and things like that. So it's been a couple of years.
Yeah, I use Visual Studio for C#. You know, if you're doing like, say you're doing a web API, I'll use Visual Studio for that, and then I'll be doing, you know, Angular or SharePoint framework in VS Code. Yeah, I find that works quite well.
So.
All right. Has anybody else got any questions?
Did someone mention beer?
Yeah, there may have been beer mentioned. Beer or
That's
gin.
good.
I got given a bottle of award-winning gin today, so I might go and try that out.
Well, I figured since I was hanging out, I was going to get some whiskey, but you know.
Yeah.
Oh, Dylan, should we go and get our whiskey collection and just tempt?
No. I don't have a whiskey collection. I have a bottle. And it's not even single malt. It's actually you guys know Neil Hodgkinson?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So he got me started on this on a whiskey called Monkey Shoulder, and it's his favorite. It's his actual favorite whiskey. In fact, I bought him for his birthday a decanter. It's really hard to kind of see. I don't know if it'll show up or not. Oh, with the camera. Anyway, it's a decanter. It's a Stormtrooper head, and
Cool.
so I've got to go get a bottle of Monkey Shoulder to put in there. You can't give an empty decanter, and so I've been drinking that. I don't know if I had single malt, but I don't know if I have any left. So. But Simon and I may or may not have drank whiskey in the past.
Yeah, I was resisting the temptation to remind you about the whiskey encounter. My ongoing job to re-educate the US as to what you should drink. The clue is it's not Canadian Club.
It's not, and the problem with taking whiskey lessons from Simon is I don't remember any of them the next day.
Yeah. What was it? Crown Royal. That was the one. And
I do like Crown Royal, but that's not. But that's, you know, I understand that's not considered whiskey. So no, what was it? What is he wanted? He wanted, was it Crown Royal and like Diet Coke or something like that?
Yeah.
That Keith wanted, and Simon went, absolutely not. You will not purchase that in my presence.
I think we ended up emptying the bottle of Talisker on the.
We did.
Between us. Yeah. Yes. So does that mean we're going to go get beer? 5 minute.
Oh, I think
Yeah.
so.
I'm actually going to go and get a Sam Smith's from Tadcaster, which bizarrely I actually first drank in Houston because there's somebody I knew from Rice University who absolutely obsessed about this beer, and it's just up the road from us.
Yeah.
Bizarrely, Sam Smith's Old Brewery beer is kind of like a cult item amongst some people. I remember seeing it there in Specs Liquor Store, which I think they're in Dallas, aren't they? Specs.
We have Specs. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember